Welcome back to the Unbreakable Boundaries podcast with your host, myself, Jennifer Maneely. I am really excited for this upcoming guest. Her name is Tracy Redfearn, and I met her at an interesting place. It was at my ski lake of all places, water ski lake at all places, and I had put up my artwork. Some of you have heard about my artwork. If you haven't, you can definitely go check it out. It's a lot of inspirational art with a lot of really amazing quotes. And so I threw this thing up and was like, I don't know what's gonna happen, but we'll just see. And this is how I met Tracy. So I put it up, had no expectations. I come down, I'm sitting, and she says, "Oh my gosh, I just love this." And in that launched a beautiful conversation to where
Oh,
we're here now. So Tracy, thank you so much for coming on. I'm so
thank
excited to
you.
have
Thank
this.
you. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of, Jen.
Yes. And so I think really what started sparking this conversation was she was saying how, she works with schools as a trauma professional, correct? You can always correct me if I'm
Yes.
not using the
Mhm.
right language. And obviously, when she brings up something like trauma or grief in kids, I'm like, oh, we need to have this conversation. So
It was on, right?
it was on from there. I was like, "Well, let me tell you." And I started telling her a little bit about what I do, working with families that have substance abuse issues, and that's how we kind of got started on that really big conversation. Because how much does the trauma and the adolescent experience kind of a lot of times will go into what we see that turns into like an addiction,
That's right.
or people that have the substance abuse issues. I'll get so many calls on parents that really focus a lot on that, maybe that traumatic event or something that happened to people when they were younger. And now here we are years later as it continues to present, and how it kind of, we're looking at some of those developmental needs that go sometimes unmet, that aren't even ours as parents or the schools, that they're not necessarily ours to meet, but it is good to know what those needs are so that we can support the adolescents and the kids in finding those needs. Is that Tracy, please feel free to chime in.
I think you're on it. I think
Yeah.
you're hitting all those things that are important.
Yes. And we were talking about the kind of that grief and the needs and the trauma, and across the board, what would you say would be the top 3 things that you're looking for, that you think that, these kids, I'm gonna just refer to people as kids, that these kids kind of need to support themselves through their experience that they're having, in adolescence?
I'd have to say the top three things in terms of trauma, grief, and loss, Jen, would have to be a voice. The first thing.
Voice.
It's my voice matters,
Mm,
which is your story, the child's story. I have a young girl right now that just came from Mexico. Horrible things. Um, little sister was murdered, and then she gets left behind because dad comes here to look for work in America, and the
mhm.
grandma's boyfriend molest her. And then there's just so many, and then her actual biological mother dies. So you talk about trauma, trauma, trauma. I mean, just
Wow.
seeing a sister or a sibling die in itself is a huge trauma, right?
Oh, yeah.
But then when you get cultural things, she ends up here. I've lost my identity as a Hispanic young woman. And then I've lost my mother to death. All of those things, a child, because these were all happening at different ages of her childhood,
Mhm.
led her now to being a teenager who is still, while 16, is that little 3-year-old girl who saw her 1-year-old sister die by gunfire.
Right. Wow.
So giving her a voice, and I asked her, I was like, "So what is the one thing that that little girl needed?"
Yeah.
She said, "I just wanted somebody to pick me up, but everybody's going to." And so through all these years, she said, "I don't matter." And what is she doing
Mm,
every day? She's smoking pot. She's having promiscuous sex, all to feel what? Which I feel is the second thing that a child needs
mm.
is connection.
Yeah.
There's gotta be connection, and, I mean, I would say safety first, but they don't get that. They just wanna feel heard. "Oh my god,
Yeah.
you not see me? Yeah, my sister died, but I was the one that was here when she died. I saw it." And
Well, and so when you say, it's you say safety first, and you're talking about really someone being heard, but isn't someone being heard really a part of safety?
oh, come on, you're so on it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because it's
Because you're
like,
not until you're ready, you can't tell that story. It's gotta be a
right,
safe place. It's gotta have a safe space, a haven to really be able to just unload all of that, you know?
right. And because I'm thinking about so many times where A and this is I think this is almost just a natural thing. When someone is talking about something that is difficult to hear by someone else, whether it's, even if it's like my own mother or just someone in general. So I think about what happens to me if someone calls me up and they're telling me a story that's difficult and painful. What is my immediate response?
Mm.
And maybe I will start, like, kind of being uncomfortable,
Oh, yeah.
and I might play like I'm listening, but I'm not, because the only thing I really wanna do is get off the phone
It's uncomfortable,
because
right?
it's uncomfortable.
Oh my gosh, I remember, like, one of the things we trained for in graduate school is, you want to have that, "I'm not moved by this."
Right.
But when I mean, it's just the way I'm created, and I know I'm doing what I'm destined to do, is that heart to help
Mhm.
others, to be healing, to bring healing into situations, but there are still almost every time, because every story is unique, you go, "Ooh."
Right.
There's that wash, and I'm thinking, if that makes me feel like that, what does that make that person feel like? It's their shame that I've gone
Mhm.
through this. What was that like, you know? And
Right.
I'm just after, so many years, I'm just learning what you just said, and that's just to be in it and to listen with unconditional,
Mhm.
positive regard for
Right.
what that person's saying so that they know, dang, she heard me. And that might be just reiterating those key points that they said. So I've got to really tune in instead of listening to my heart, what
Yeah.
you just said, like, oh my God, that child went through that. But just listening to them.
Mhm.
Because when children feel heard, then they don't feel like they've got to open up doors to be validated in
Mhm.
other venues, whether it's promiscuous sex, drugs, alcohol, you know,
Right. Well, and I think there are.
unhealthy
Right,
relationships.
right, and I think there are a lot of feelings that are associated with the trauma, right? And, like, when we don't really hear people, and I wanna point this out because I think this is really important, and this is where our work comes in,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
Where how do I hear someone, their story, allow myself not only to be uncomfortable, but how do I not go into the place of pitying them?
Oh,
Because pity just doesn't serve anyone, right? Like, it's not a great, and that person, I can tell you, on the other side of things, don't want your pity.
that's right. That's the last thing they want.
They
They
don't
don't
want
want
you to feel sorry
sympathy.
for
They
them.
don't want what they really want to know is that, does it really matter what I went through?
Yes, and so
You know,
when
but it's not the sympathy, it's the care.
right.
Wow, that must have been really hard as a little girl. What
Yes.
do you remember what you were thinking that day? What went through your head when everybody went to the little girl that was shot, you know?
Yeah.
And here for weeks and, you know, went from days, hours really, to days to weeks to
Yeah.
years. Here she is at 16 and she's just now going from age 3 to 16 to get help.
Right.
You know, I
And
was never feeling like I could tell this to anybody.
yeah. And I, for me, because we're talking about loss as well, and I know for the people that I have lost in my own life, so it as difficult as it is, but as more emotionally mature and healthy I become, the more I feel like it's important for me to talk about those people because of something one that you said that I think is very important is when I talk about people that I really care about, and even if it's painful, in that moment, not only am I connected to myself, but I'm connected to them.
Right.
And I'm sure that she wanted to feel connected to her sister,
Mhm.
connected to her mom, and connected to, the situation. And even as hard as it is even connected to her own feelings about the situation.
Mhm.
And so when she has that platform, it creates that security for her to feel like she can really be supported in going through those feelings for herself. Isn't that kind of a an important thing for people?
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And in this particular case, she's been through numerous counselors in the process, but went because dad and the stepmom made her go through it, right? You know, you're being
Right,
made to go through, but she wasn't ready yet.
right.
And it was because in those initial times when the trauma first happened, she was shut down. So what
Mhm.
did she what was the layer that she put on is, "I don't matter.
Yeah.
I'm not chosen." Not only, you know, of course, everybody, as she has said to me, had to deal with my little sister who was laying there and ended up dying en route to the hospital, but then it was daddy, and then it was mama, and then, you know, mama ends up dying because she's pregnant, you know, this I mean,
Right.
it's a story like you I mean, it's like off of something off of a Lifetime. But for her, it was like there was never a time for her.
Mhm.
And it's like there's never going to be the perfect time for you to break off all those layers that you put on since that little tiny girl. But at the same time, you've taken on the persona as that little girl. She looks like a little girl.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When she speaks, the voice and all of it, I'm like, go back.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts in that day? And you know what she said? Hey, I matter. Does anyone even see me here?
Mm.
She didn't know how to process the death. She didn't know how to process all the other things that came about over the years as that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, just feeling like you matter and there's no more that rejection, you know.
Yeah.
And that's where I think she is that I wasn't, her words were, I wasn't chosen.
Yeah.
But think of a 3-year-old little girl. What would a 3-year-old little girl? You know,
Mm.
I went back to the developmental history. She didn't have a lot of language at that time. Dad was between America and, you know, and Mexico. And she didn't have a really strong foundation of language. So was her strong way of interpreting and taking in information was through her visual and her auditory.
Yeah.
And it was very skewed. It was very off. Because, you know, no what parent wants to be a bad parent? My dad and mom
No,
just nobody looked at me to see what I needed. And I'm like,
right.
"Oh, but I think that all parents do what they can do." And here they were with their own grief and loss and a huge trauma that was like so many implications from a legal standpoint because it involved a gun that was in the house, you know, and the father took on the it's my fault. I had a loaded gun in the house and another child playing with the gun, you know? But she was the little sister who was in between and didn't get shot. So she's like, I'm just the one that nobody wishes. but that's really not what happened at all. It's
And
how
it
the 3-year-old cognition, how she perceived it.
isn't that an interesting, because it's what you're saying is it's the perceptions of what happened, right? She didn't get shot, and somehow now that grew into a belief that she didn't matter. Like, why didn't I get shot? Right?
Yeah,
and I don't mean to laugh 'cause it's not funny, but it is uncomfortable, and that's my way of
well, that's what I think all of us
dealing with it,
do.
right? But it's that kind of how people are perceiving. And this is something I want to bring forward to my audience, because this is the audience that we're talking about, where I'm working with families that have these loved ones with substance abuse. So what does all of this have to do with that particular thing? And this is what I'll say is, when you talk about being heard, that voice, that safety, I
Mhm.
can't tell you how many, because I'm in recovery, and the pain that I've heard thousands of people talk about is how they wish that their parents just understood,
Yeah,
that their parents heard their experience, that they just heard. And this is as grown people in recovery, not this, the 10-year-old or whatever, but these are the grown people that cry in meetings begging and pleading that they had a better connection with their parents, but their parents just won't hear them. They won't listen to them. They don't want to understand. They don't want to, deal with it. And so that's really painful for them. And I think about a life-changing moment even in the last maybe like 4 or 5 years for myself, was when I was able to have a really difficult conversation with my mom about something. And at first, she did what I think any human being has a tendency to do,
yeah.
wants to push back and cut it off and no. And I kind of said, no, we're going to talk about this.
This
Like,
matters.
this matters. And of course, I'm older, I'm mature, I have a better language. I can kind of say, no, we're going to talk. Like, I can kind of say that. But me just being able to say my side of the story, and her not go into defensiveness and just hear that. And even not that she had a part to own necessarily, but there was like a more of that. I can hear, like, I'm going to stand and hear what you're saying, as uncomfortable as it makes me somehow. And I don't, that moment for me, and I don't even think I've talked to her about this, shifted so many things, because I felt like I could actually finally move on.
Mhm.
Now, it was not her job to help me move on, but it certainly helped.
Oh, absolutely.
I would have had to find a different way to do that, that would have not been as almost instant.
Yeah.
If you could say,
And
if I could
maybe
say
not
that.
even therapeutic, right? It wouldn't have
Right.
been, it would have set you back instead of
It
forward.
could have, I mean, there's so many ways that could have been, but her being grounded in herself enough in that moment to
Mhm.
just hear what my experience was like, whether it was true or not, is irrelevant.
Mhm.
But what my experience of the situation was, and my perceptions of the situation, that's all I just wanted people to hear, is that this is what I experienced. And so when I think about my audience and how important it is, how can we be very clear in ourselves to not put a wall, a metaphorical wall between me and what someone else is saying, just because it's either true or not true. It's their perceptions of the truth.
That's right.
We can sift out the real truth later, but they have to be able to state their perceptions of the truth in order to get to the truth.
That's right. It's like be quiet, be quiet, be quiet is what I've learned. Just be quiet, be quiet, be quiet, Tracy. even if it doesn't seem
Yeah.
rational, it doesn't seem logical, but that's not the way it really is. But being quiet,
Yeah.
empathetic, just a nod.
Yeah.
Wow, what was that like for you?
Yeah.
Even and it opens the door for them to go, oh, they're hearing me, and go deeper, deeper. Tell me more about that. What was that like when you thought that? And it's
Yeah.
almost like when you can go deeper and have those really good listening ears, that they're like talking themselves through what's
Mhm.
truth and what's those places
Yeah.
where, because children and even adults disconnect, right?
Mhm.
And so
Absolutely.
their reality does become really skewed. But just allowing them to talk it through in everyday life, right?
Yeah.
When we can talk it through and we feel heard, no matter what the situation, traumatic or not, it helps us stay grounded and in the moment, in the
Mhm.
truth. And teaching young people to stay in truth is at my
Yeah.
core, because then they know reality. Is
Yeah.
that really what happened? But I don't have to say it even like that. It's just the nods. It's just the wow. And then like, well, wait a minute. Let me.
When
and
they
you
start, yeah.
and
When they
as
s
they begin to process, because they packed it in so deep, and you can hear sometimes
Mhm.
that their stories are so deep that when they start pulling it out, well, she's not shutting me down. Dang, I'm going to go further. It just allows for those things that need to be uprooted and broken up, the
Mhm.
distortions. Wow, you get
Yeah.
that's how you get healing. And it doesn't happen in one session.
No.
You start session two and you're like, tell me, last week you were da 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 da. And then they're like, whoa, she didn't forget. No, no. Hearing people is I think, one of the best skills that,
Mhm.
whether you're in a workplace or a therapeutic session or a family in the den, listening is a skill that is far underrated in society today, where everybody's got a voice talking on social media. But when you're in one-on-one relationship with somebody, you're just
Mhm.
saying, wow, I never knew you went through all that. And when
Yeah.
you start talking about family, and I'll be the first to say, I got stuff in my family. And
Mhm.
so, allowing somebody to say, I was at a really bad place in my life, and this is what I did. Wow, I didn't know.
Yeah.
You don't have to have eloquent words or language. It's just having the empathy and the heart connection that can bring healing. And I know, yes, I've got degrees, but I submit that a heart connection brings greater healing any day
Mhm.
than all the letters in the world you can have after your name.
Right.
I mean, just what you're doing in your podcast.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of people whenever I start talking about boundaries, I think a lot of people immediately make this assumption or this visualization that they're like, "Oh, I have to put a wall between me and another person." Right? And like they're like, "Oh, that's so uncomfortable." And I'm like, "No, no, listen. When I talk about creating like the unbreakable boundaries, I am talking about how do I be very clear in myself to remain in connection with another person,
Mhm.
right? Because I think that's so important. It's not actually, it's about tearing the walls down, but also being mindful of where we're sacrificing ourselves. And let's not do that,
Yeah.
right? Let's not sacrifice ourselves. But if you're going to have a relationship with a person that is doing a lot of things that puts you at risk or is dangerous or whatever, let's talk about how you can stay out of that, but also how you're going to stay in a relationship with that person. And that comes with a lot of clarity. And back to what you're saying about really being heard and listening,
Yeah.
really listening. What it
Mhm.
takes is that confidence to sit and not take things personally.
That there you go. And, I'm not gonna punish you because you have this view or this thought, or you handle your situation differently than I think you should, or the way
Yeah.
that I would, should I say it that way.
Right.
You know, we don't have to agree. People disagree all the time, but it's in that place of honoring and not disrespecting, because this was the path I went down, but God, I realized it was the
Mhm.
wrong path. I want to get back to here, but people just push me further apart, because that moment you're real and you say, that thing that they know, but we needed to talk about it, and just have those hugs, and that, gosh, I'm
Yeah.
so sorry I did not listen very well, and that you felt the need to do that and to validate and honor people. I think our society has really lost sight of a lot of that good stuff,
Yeah.
of honor,
Of
of honor.
and going beyond of like when we talk about listening, it's not always necessarily what are they saying versus what are they really saying, right? And really hearing them and what they're really saying, like asking questions to spark a conversation to get a clearer idea of where they're getting this information
Yes.
and why did they perceive it in that way. So, I guess I there were so many things that I did not know were happening when I was growing up because, as parents and kids, there's just this we're not going to share everything with the kids that's happening. We're just not
You
going to
shouldn't.
do that,
You
right?
don't need to share everything with a kid. That's right.
Right. But it doesn't mean that the kid isn't developing a perception around what's happening with the information that they're presented with.
Go there. We should go
Yeah.
there, but you need to do it on a healthy level that's not going to cause fear and provoke
Right.
more anxiety. But if a child is perceiving that someone's using and there's something off in our home,
Mhm.
having a platform where you can say, you may have overheard something last night.
Yeah.
What was going through your head? And
Yeah.
explaining and giving enough explanation on a child level that
Yeah.
we're going through something, but what are your questions? That gives them their voice. And at the
Yes.
same time, you're getting to say, man, I really messed up last
Right.
time. And it
Yeah.
probably didn't feel so good in our home. But I just think I think parents indulge too much, and they don't know, they're either doing nothing or saying nothing, or they're going over the top and telling the child everything. And you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
Children just want to know, did you know that I was in the other room? Did you know I knew so and so? Wow. Well, what were you thinking? Just let them say it. You
Yeah.
don't have to tell them what really was going on. Just hear what they got to say, and validate that I didn't mean for all that to happen.
Yeah. I was this brings up an interesting story. So I was probably 5 years old. I don't remember everything when I'm 5. But this stuck out to me, right? And my mom and I have since talked about this and I kind of laugh at it now, but I remember a very specific day in which my mom got very, very upset. What she was upset with, I have no idea. I do now because we talked about it. But at the time, I'm 5 years old, and all I know is my mom is screaming into her pillow, right? That's the only information I have is screaming into the pillow.
Okay.
Now, my 5-year-old little kid brain is sitting there looking at her going, "Mom is really upset. What have I done wrong?"
That's right. Yeah.
Right? So, she must be really mad at something, but she's so mad
Mad
she
at
doesn't
me. Yeah, the
yeah.
internal.
She doesn't wanna talk about it because it's so bad. Now, what have I done recently that would make her that mad?
Yeah,
And so now my 5 little kid-year-old brain, I'm thinking, "Was it this? Was it that? Was it this?" Now, eventually, I'm like, "Okay, well, she's" as a 5-year-old, I am not asking my mom that's screaming into the pillow what's wrong or, asking her to, because she didn't even know I was there. She didn't know that this was part of my experience, even as an adult, right? We talk about it later. She goes, yeah, you know what? I used to do that a lot when I got really mad at my own mom. Because she would say something that was just so that
She's giving me advice that's overwhelming.
right. And like I think my grandmother, at least towards me and the relationship, my grandmother loved me, but she was very hard on my mom when it came to me. And she said a lot of not really wonderful things to my mom about me, but I didn't know any of that. I didn't know that my mom would get angry and yell into her pillow because um she was upset with her mom, right? Like, cuz I only have my relationship with my grandmother, which was very loving, very kind, very supportive, but my mom had her own relationship. And it
Wow,
was very different. And but my point in saying that is my little kid brain took a situation and made a whole lot of beliefs about that situation, that it somehow had to do with me.
that's right,
My
internalized.
Mhm. And I grew up with that. And now I'm in recovery, and years later, I think about those things and I get to ask my mom about her experience. And now I'm in a situation where it's like, man, all of these really like deep beliefs are still impacting my journey
Whoa,
that I created. And my mom is not responsible for that piece of things,
right.
because she
No.
doesn't know how I internalized situations that had nothing to do with her. You see?
So having that conversation, just what you said was when you remember that time. And I want to process this. Stay with me in it, mom. When I think of adults to their parent, this
Yeah.
is what I remember. And a parent being able to say, well, what did you need at that moment?
Mm,
What did you need? What did that little girl? And when the moment that mom says, well, let me give that now, or the dad says, let me give that
mm,
now, it just allows for forgiveness to come in and healing to come in. Whatever it was that that child needed
yeah.
changes the perception of everything. You mean you really felt that way?
Yeah.
And that little girl suddenly goes from 5 all of a sudden to like 8 or 10, and moving ahead. And the next memory that really settled in. Memories, I think, are truly, Jen, when I think of grief and loss, I won't say the pillar, I'll say they're the blanket of healing and hope. Because, when you have at least one good memory that you can pull out, it's
Yeah.
like that amazing fuzzy blanket that we all have, sitting on the couch or, across the bed that we can just put on. And good memories are what bring hope into
Mhm.
situations. Well, what I hoped for, which is what is needed,
Mhm.
if I had had this, then this could have been the outcome. So you've got those ideas of I need, a child or adult needing a voice and safe and secure and unconditional positive regard,
Mhm.
but also knowing and being able to have that person that they can have a dialogue with that allows for them to say what was needed. And even in this day, what do you need? How can
Yeah.
I help you? And it just brings them out and up into from the there to the here and the now. And it's beautiful stories. It's a beautiful story.
And I because I'm thinking about, like, a lot of times, the people that are deep into substance abuse and they're trying to have these relationships with the parents that don't understand, they get into these arguments all the time, right? You were such a shitty mom or shitty dad or whatever. You were so mean. And
Yes, I
imagine,
was.
right? But imagine changing the conversation that
Yeah,
says, "You know what? You're right. I may have not been the best parent that you needed at that moment." right? Like, and if I could do something different, I totally would, but I cannot change the past. The only thing that I can do to support you and help you is how are we going to move forward?
That's right.
And it's like I am willing, because this was a pivotal moment even for my mom when I set this was right before I got it, like the day before I got into rehab. She caught everything caught up to me in this day, right? And I'm sitting there kind of pretty high, not completely hearing everything that she's saying to me in this moment that I'm like caught.
Yeah.
um and she goes, "Listen, we I may not have been the best mom. I I had to take responsibility for some things, and when you're ready to work through those things, I am here. We will work through
Mhm,
them, but
mhm.
I am not going to continue to allow, these kinds of things into my life. I cannot have you in my life if you're acting in this way. But
Right.
I am so happy to and she didn't say this is not verbatim. This is a generalization, but the general idea was I will work on my stuff as a parent if you're willing to work on your stuff and figure your shit out, but this is
Yeah,
not
yeah,
on
yeah.
me. You're using and your behavior and all of this stuff right now, that's not on me.
That's right. Yeah, we all have choices.
Yeah.
This is the choice that you're making, but in every choice, there's this way. It can
Yeah.
bring us together if we're willing to have some tough conversations, and I'm not just saying words to be saying words. When you know somebody loves you and you love them, when you really were a
Mhm.
shitty mom. Or I was a really badass kid,
Right.
but I was doing what I could manage.
Right.
And I know that I was a 16-year-old mom. I know I was not then, but man, fast forward to my mid 50s. I have garnered a lot of wisdom and a lot of tools and skills that make me have an ability in an even greater way to go back and say,
Right.
we need to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And that's where the memory part comes in. I remember one time I probably hurt you with things I said or what
Mm.
I had around you, you know?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I think kids need to hear that. So when you were saying that while ago about the child saying, something that happened, I think those are conversations that are very important in
Mhm.
healing. Is sometimes children just want to know because parents, I think children put their parents up here and that they never make
Mhm.
mistakes. When in fact, I developed parenting skills from my parents, which were really bad because it was all about addiction, but I was
Right.
the one that ran out of the house and said, I don't want to watch. I don't want to be a part of this. And now, but again, fast forwarding ahead, I've been able to go back and say, even to my own mom now, my father is dead, but to say this happened or that happened and
Mhm.
what really happened because I was just a little girl and I probably got it all wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that is a really important step. And even this week, I was working with some teen moms because that's one of the things that is truly a passion of mine because I was a young mom.
Mm.
Jen is, I gave them all an oyster shell, but with a pearl glued to it,
Aw.
painted. And I said, do you know where a pearl came from? And they're like, what? Um, but pearls are formed from the dirt. And
Mhm.
and I said to them, and I say this, and I'm not trying to just have a lot of fluff, but the foundation of what child and family has been built out of
Mhm.
has been built out of the dirt. Those
Mm.
things that nobody else wants to talk about, that elephant in the room, nobody wants to talk about my father. There was, the drugs, the alcohol, I was molested, all of those things nobody wants to talk about.
Mhm.
And even in my teenage years, I really didn't understand that. But at this day, I was able to put a layer on there to
Mhm.
preserve it as my story and to help so many other people see that they're not alone in the journey. And that's where the security and the
Mhm.
connection comes from. You are not alone. And
Yeah.
the very foundation of what child and family, the dirt is what he's used to build the foundation of the work we do in trauma, grief, and loss, because there's transparency. I used to feel so much shame,
Mm.
and now it's like, eh, if it helps this child, or it helps this mother, or it helps this mother and father and how they parent now, I don't really care anymore. I don't
Yeah.
care about how I'm perceived to the outer world. I just want them to say, these are tools that might be good and maybe better in your toolbox and serve you well. If you really want to connect to your son or your daughter, we have to be willing to learn and to grow and have new ways to love and love well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's this is kind of all a little bit of my belief is that all of these core principles, connection, love, security, safety, all of that stuff, that is at the core. It never changes in the human
Come
needs
on.
of what we need, right? It
That's it.
may start presenting differently. We may get better at hiding and pretending like it doesn't exist or like it doesn't bother us. But at the core of it, we need this. And going back to something very important that you said is having the tough conversations and being present to the tough conversations, right? This is a lot of when I cuz a lot of people in this community they talk about tough love and they're like, "Oh, I don't think tough love is really works and it really, I it doesn't feel good." And I said tough love is not about being tough on them. It's about having or making decisions that are tough to do. And
Right.
it's about also having those tough conversations and being very grounded and present to that.
And if I might can add to that, Jen,
Please.
maybe because I've had to practice this my own self.
Mhm.
There might be things that start to come up inside of me, and it almost
Mhm.
begins to feel that between the two of you, whoever
Yeah.
it is, when you're having that conversation, that tough love moment, and say, I don't agree with you. We really do need to stay in this, but I'm a little overwhelmed right this minute.
Mhm.
Can we take 5 and come back? Because this is not going to go well if you know, if you know that you aren't hearing them, you know that there's either I'm misperceiving what they're saying, I'm
Mhm.
misunderstanding, or either they are really way off. It's still whatever. I think being sold out as a parent, being
Mm.
sold out, as the child, and saying, I'm willing to preserve our love. If we can keep that love connection, I got to break from this for a minute, right?
Yeah.
But God, I hear you. This is so important to you. And I want you to know I love you. But let's give it a few, but let's come right back and giving it an appointed time. Making space and a time specifically for that, I think is a tool that every parent
Mhm.
should have in their toolbox, whether they're arguing about the lunch box or they're arguing about something that the kid heard the night before, the day before, and having regular conversations no matter what.
Yeah.
Don't let them build up for years.
Yeah.
Have a
Absolutely.
meal every night with your kids or as often as you can. I'm sorry, I like, a fast food meal every now and then again too, but there is nothing that can take the place of connection.
And I think culturally to a certain extent we've lost, and I don't want to get off on a tangent. So I'm going to just say this and
Move on.
move on. But because before all of the technology that really distracted us and somehow made our lives very efficient, but also limits the actual real conversations that we're having. We used to and I don't this is not like, oh, in the old days kind of conversation, but it's real when we really used to talk to each other because that's what we had, right? We
Yes.
used to share wisdom because we'd sit around at the dinner table, no TV, no distractions. All we had was like, and this is where our attention span has greatly diminished, is because all of the social media, and this isn't, there's
Gaming,
but
TV,
there's always gonna
Netflix.
be, we're not, this isn't one of those like, "Oh, we can't have this stuff," but it's like, we can, and being mindful of where also our human
Yes.
needs need to also be met, and it's, we've been talking a lot about that connection. Social media, TV, all those stuff are creating what I like to think of as, like, false connections. So, like,
Uh-huh.
Facebook, Instagram, they're quote unquote connecting you, but it's not on a human need level. It's
Right.
just in a technology way, not in a heart, like it's like more of a left brain, not more of the heart center way.
That's right.
So how are we connecting at a real level through the heart? And it's through the conversations, the real conversations, when you're connecting with someone else at a heart level, not in a Facebook or a message or a text or a
A
whatever,
game or a movie.
gaming
And yeah,
or
and I will tell you what I say to my parents all the time, because I do parenting classes often, is if that is a big thing for your family, gaming or a Netflix or a ball game, whatever, if you're not connected at the end of it,
Mhm.
your children don't, they're not gonna trust in you. If
Yeah.
you're sitting and doing this, you've got to, you can have the greatest, you can have the Waltons on, if you remember who the Waltons are. You can have the Waltons on, but if you're doing this, right?
Right.
What you need to do is say, there's no technology right now. Let's
Right.
talk. Oh my gosh, and talk about it. Did you
Yeah.
see, John Boy, or or man, you can game together, but it's purposeful, mindful. I love that you
Mhm.
use the word mindful, and it's not, when I say mindful, I'm not talking a fluky, hooky, whatever mindful. I'm saying I'm purposeful. I'm
Yeah.
in this because I want me, you, and if, whoever, the significant other is in that part of it, you need to be connected. If
Yeah.
it's me and my husband sitting watching, a show on Netflix, or if it's as a family, the whole goal of doing it is not just so you're all sitting in the same room,
Right.
but you
Right.
want it to be what you just said, connection and relationship.
Right.
And I had a family class recently, and someone said, "So what is love?" And I don't know. Everyone can define it differently,
Mhm.
but I believe whether we're having conversations right here in this podcast, or there's somebody in China, Iran, wherever, I believe it's love is something that is universal and we all want it. And it affects affection. The core word of affection is affect. And
Mhm.
we are either affecting someone in a positive and connected way, or we're emptying them.
Yeah.
My heart as a daughter, a mother, a grandmother, an advocate for other families is, well, man, I want to connect.
Mhm.
I want there to be an affection that feels buckets at the end of the day.
Right.
I want to do more filling than I do emptying. And I am human. I have temper.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have feelings and emotions that need to be validated.
Mhm.
And I just think it's learning new tools of how to communicate and connect that can
Right.
change the dynamic of family. And I just want to say that I love what you're doing, and that,
Thank you.
putting the boundaries in there is what makes all the difference. And
Yeah.
they are unbreakable. I'm not going to punish you if you don't think like me.
Right. Right. Well,
Right?
it's not, yeah, and it's
I'm
like,
not gonna not love you because you cross my boundary, but I might need to say that's not making me feel loved in it.
right. I cross my own, like, there's times where, I say unbreakable boundaries, and then people will always be like, oh, but what about this? And what about that? And then I think I have to be this guru and people can't ever like do something that I don't like. Right. But it's more of like, okay, when something happens, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to be aware, like, what was it that I didn't like? And how can I communicate with this person to say, this was not good for me. And be on, like, honor myself every time. So it doesn't mean that someone isn't going, and I'm not like a hard person, right? So I'm not going around and being mean and creating distance between people because I think about boundaries. No, it's more of like people know exactly what I'm willing to accept into my life and what I'm not willing to accept through a loving and caring way when I communicate of like, yeah, I'm not that's not going to be my role. There's just certain people I love them. I'm not going to hang out with them
Yeah.
because it's not, it's their behaviors impact my life too much.
Sure.
When those behaviors change and I don't feel uncomfortable anymore or unsafe, that person is 100% allowed back into my life. I don't care who that person is. That person is allowed back into my life when the behaviors that are making me feel uncomfortable and unsafe are no longer present. Everyone has a right to change.
Sure.
And we can have the difficult conversations if they've hurt me in some way, if they've lied, if they've done whatever. I was like, look, this is my experience. This is where I don't trust you. This is why I don't, but you can earn it, right? Everyone has the right to earn it back.
That's right. That's good
That's
stuff.
that's how I see it. And one more thing is I want to touch on this just a little bit, and then I really want to talk about this camp that you have going on. But what we've been talking about is this connection, and what does it look like when we disconnect? So when we're talking about having the tough conversations, and when you were saying you need to, sometimes you may need to take a pause. And it's at that point in which it's like, how do you know when you need to take that pause? Well, am I getting ready to react to a situation? Am I getting ready to disconnect from this person? Do I feel disconnected?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the time to take that pause and say, no, I'm going to stay in connection, but I'm feeling disconnected. I'm going to go connect with myself real quick and then I'm going to come back.
And I think that's just really how you say it.
Yeah.
I had a kid ask that recently. Well, I don't really know how to do that. It is a skill, like riding
Mm-hmm.
a bike. The more you do it, and we teach children, and that's what the heart of the camp is, giving new tools to parents and children. And when you can honestly, I remember saying to a kid one day, he's like, I don't think I'm brave enough to say that to my mom. I said,
Mm,
think of yourself as brave? And he says, well, no. And I'm like, well, you are brave.
yeah.
You can never, ever be brave until that thing you're afraid of, you just do it.
Yeah.
But mom, I really need to talk to you, but I can't right now.
Right.
And it's okay as long as, and teaching children to, it's something I feel like we've lost a long ways down the road was is respect. That
Mhm.
disrespect is the place that we all from societal, what is expected in the norm is rage and yelling and I me what I need. But
Mhm.
we can say the reason, you can set it up in the contact that the reason that I'm here is because I really do want to hear you, but I think it's important for you to hear me too.
Mm.
And let's go ahead and set it up that, if your voice gets really high or mine gets really high, you might need to remind me we need to take five.
Yeah. So you're saying set the conditions and create the space intentionally when with these,
Mindfully,
yeah,
yes, and
mindfully, and just be like,
purposeful.
we're going to have this, but here are some of the guidelines that we're going to stick to. When this happens, this is how we're going to handle it. When this happens, this is how we're going to handle it. When you get to a certain point of upsetness where
Right.
it's, like we're going to take a break. Yeah. So it's like, how do we intentionally and mindfully create this space instead of just, you know,
When we know we've got those big things that, and I don't like using the term too often so that, but it's so true. The elephant in the room.
mm-hmm,
When there are things that you know have gone on for way too long and no one's
mm,
addressed them, I believe as parents, it's our responsibility to initiate that.
yeah. I call those sometimes, depending on who's in front of me, it's the elephant in the room, or what are the missing conversations that we're not having,
I
right?
like that.
The
Oh,
what's
I
the
love that.
what's the missing conversation that we need to have,
What's
right?
what's that thing that you've always you have felt a need to talk about and we
Yeah,
haven't been able to talk about, or just understand? What is it you need to understand about me and me you?
yeah,
Yeah, it's good
yeah.
stuff. That's
You know,
good.
we've talked a lot about and we've hinted at like tools and resources, and you actually for kids, I'm going to let you talk about it, but you have the Narrow Way Ranch.
We have used the Narrowway Ranch. I will say, last year we had so many people come that it was a rather large farm.
Mm,
Um, but because of parking and the need for space, we're looking for something a little bigger this year.
right. Oh,
Um,
it's the All Seasons
the
Grief Camp.
all seasons, and we decided we rebranded
Mm,
instead of saying all seasons grief camp, it's an
mm,
all seasons healing heart camp.
yes, I
And
love
so,
it.
throughout all seasons, because stuff continues to come up, you've got anniversaries, you've got birthdays, you've got holidays where the grief will resurface. And I think a lot of people, I remember being someone saying to me, "There's the grief lady in the grocery store," and my granddaughter, and I'm like, "Well, that's kind of an honor that I'm the
uh,
grief lady,"
the Grief Lady.
because somebody's got to do and
Yeah.
help people have the tools they need.
Mm-hmm.
Grief is in everything, not just death. There's
Yeah.
loss of relationships, loss of seasons. We lose time.
Yeah.
We've lost
Absolutely.
time, and that is grief. When there's a
Yeah.
parent and a child and we've lost time together, that's loss.
Yeah.
That's grief. And it makes you angry. It makes you go, I could have done this different, or I could have done that different. I'm
Mm-hmm.
really sad about it. All those stages of grief.
Mm-hmm.
And it really just stood out to me probably about 2 years into being in private practice that families need a voice. They
Mm-hmm.
needed to be able to come together in a day or a weekend. And we started out doing weekends, and we're hoping to grow it into a different way. And every year we're understanding more what families need in that
Yeah.
process of grief and loss. But it's a day of hope.
Mm.
What is it that you need? What do you
Yeah.
hope will happen? And a lot of it can be when there's adults there with parents, it's connection.
Yeah.
It's us both together, learning newfound skills together, but doing some fun stuff together like horseback riding, archery, music and arts, having a meal together, learning about how you cultivate relationship when there has been a hiccup in the road.
Mm. Yeah.
And so it's my favorite thing that I do, and I could stay probably another hour on a podcast talking about all seasons healing heart, but it is absolutely a beautiful day. Like I said, we do the activities, but we share a meal together. But at the end, we have a butterfly release.
Oh,
Every participant gets a little envelope with their butterflies, and when you see hundreds of butterflies go up at one time, it just the butterfly in itself is a symbol of transformation. That
absolutely.
there's new life and newfound hope coming. It is a great day.
Yeah.
It's truly by far my favorite thing we do. And
I think that's so amazing and just especially touching on just how important it is for people to experience different things that bring them joy and connect them
mm,
with themselves, connect them with other
nature,
people, with
outdoors.
nature, get them outside, right? And
Come
it
on.
goes all into that, that safety, security, love. How do they have a platform to feel safe about opening up and communicating? And a lot of times, even this, with my art, because of the nature of it, people just feel very safe to just start talking because all of a
Yeah,
sudden they just feel confident, they feel
right.
brave, they feel like, empowered.
Yeah,
And that's what, all this is, and people can find that within themselves. So whether, they have a love for the arts, they have a love for the equestrian stuff, the music, the all of those things. It's so important for people to find their thing that they can really hold on to, so that in the darkest of the moments, they have something to lean on that
yes.
they know can bring them and balance out that.
I think that people get trapped in it, Jen.
Mhm.
They get trapped in the routine, the monotony of the thing that they picked up that wasn't healthy. And from
Right.
a cognitive behavioral standpoint, when you remove something, and even spiritually, you want to replace it with the opposite,
Mhm.
something really, really good and healthy. And I don't think there's any substitute for nature and being outdoors, whether it's
I
trail,
agree.
whether it's bows and arrows, it's art, in the archery, or it's horseback, showing them, we don't just jump on the horse. We got to have that relationship.
Yep.
Talk to that
Absolutely.
horse, talk to them, say something to them, brush them, touch, go,
Yeah.
that's 5 love languages of touch and quality time and words of affirmation. All those things are important. And that's really what is a day, is to launch
Mhm.
all of that and then have follow up the weeks to
Yeah.
come. Some people do come from all over and they need that Zoom. But there are many families that are like, oh, for the first few weeks, because we do it in late spring. It's the last Saturday in April, and we meet people wherever they are. There are some people that can give a donation, but those that can't, it's okay. We want to bring hope to as many people as we can in the Carolinas,
Absolutely. And I think what you just said is so important, even for the parents out there, because I think we can all find ourselves a little stuck in that darkness, right? And just like,
Yes.
because it's like, if you have so many events that are hitting you, that you don't know how, you haven't developed the tools to figure out how to handle that. I think we can find ourselves really stuck. And I think getting out, and this is one of the things that I work a lot with parents that find themselves in this is one of the first things. It's like, first we got to get you back connected to yourself, to like get
Right.
out, go find, get out of this darkness that you're in, and then we can make some different
Yeah.
decisions.
I
So.
will tell you what I like in it too, and then I know we need to be wrapping things up. But I had a family member that was incarcerated because of addictions,
Mhm.
and just took him down a path. I just adore him. He's my brother, and I don't
Mhm.
think he would mind me using that part about his story. And he stayed with us, and I'm like, I'm here for you. And after being incarcerated, though, when you're in
Mhm.
captivity, you're in bondage to this addiction. You know, I remember him saying to me, um, I'm not really sure who to connect to or what to connect myself to. But when you can have a space and a day that this
Mhm.
is what we're doing, and you're giving them the right tools, these are the right places. It may not be with me, but here you can go over here. This is what you have when you go home to connect to. We're truly giving people those resources that they need. Then the ground, because you come straight out, you're like, oh, I don't know what to do. Who do I listen to? That's what my heart is in all seasons. Healing heart is that the road not be too rocky.
Yeah.
We want there to be, this is safe, this is good, this is good for you, but it's going to be good if you got kids too. This is
Yeah.
what you could be doing instead of this. So
Yeah. Wow. This has been such a great conversation. I'm so grateful, one, to get to a chance to reconnect with you, and two, just continue the great conversation we were having. This is one of the reasons why I was like, when we kept talking, I said, "Oh man, we got to like record this conversation because it's so powerful, right?"
We just
Like,
don't meet people like us too often that have the same heart for
right.
connection.
Right, but it's also like, "Oh man, we just this is these are the conversations where it's like we may not always have a perfectly ribboned up, bow tied up solution to every problem, but
Right,
it's like here we are. We're just going to keep talking about it. We're going to talk about some of the tools that a person can use when they find themselves in a place that there isn't a clean cut solution to a big problem, right?
right.
Okay, there's not a clean cut solution, and yet you're still faced with the problem. What do you do? And these are the conversations. It's like, okay, well, these are the tools to help you
That's right.
manage yourself, to talk about what do you need, the safety, security, love. It's all the same, whether you're that 5-year-old kid or whether you're the 60, 70, 80-year-old mom, grandmother, or whatever.
Right,
It's
right.
all the same.
I need the words I need are your magic wand.
Yes.
This is what I feel I need. And then
Yes.
passing that to that person in front of you and saying, so what is it you feel you need? So it's the
Yeah.
what do we need? It
Mm-hmm.
goes from what I need to what we need. And then it's all
Yeah.
good from there. When you
Yeah.
stay purposeful, mindful
Mm-hmm.
that our goal is to love well, to connect, it can't be anything but a win-win and healing in the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again so
You're
much.
welcome. Thank you.
And thank you for listening to this podcast. If you want to listen to more or find more information out about this podcast and more of what I do to help families, you can go check out my page at unbreakable.boundariespodcast.com. It's full of other great podcasts just like this one, full of other great resources. Please remember to share this podcast with others. You never know who may need to hear this. People are often hiding their battles in this arena, and sharing is a great way to provide this valuable resource to a person you may not even know who needs it. And don't forget, there is always hope, even when things seem the
Yes,
most hopeless.
that's good. Yes, thank you.